and welcome to another episode of Can You Talk Real Quick? A stand-up with Pete Dominick production, where, because I know so many people, and I've been doing this so long, have a good reputation for doing great interviews and being able to turn them around real quick, I'm able to reach out to one smart person to talk about a really important issue that we all want to know about right now and get it up and posted for you to listen to wherever you're at right away. Today, I'm joined by the great Bill Browder. Everybody wanted to reach out to Bill Browder when we witnessed the events that unfolded over the weekend in Russia. Bill was the largest foreign investor in Russia until 2005, when he was denied entry to the country and declared a, quote, threat to national security for exposing corruption in Russian state-owned companies. In 2008, Bill's lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, was tragically arrested, imprisoned without trial, and systematically tortured after he uncovered a massive fraud committed by Russian government officials that involved the theft of $230 million. Sergei spent a year in prison under horrific detention conditions, was repeatedly denied medical treatment, died in prison on November 16, 2009, leaving behind a wife and 2 children. And Bill Browder then went on a mission, a one-man mission crusade to seek justice outside of Russia, started a global campaign for governments around the world to impose targeted visa bans and asset freezes on human rights abusers and highly corrupt officials. The United States was the first to impose these targeted sanctions with the passage of the Sergei Magnitsky Accountability Act in 2012, followed by the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act in 2016. Since then, Canada, UK, Baltic states, EU, and most recently Australia passed their own versions of the Magnitsky Act. Bill Browder currently working to have similar legislation passed in other countries, including New Zealand, Japan, just to name a couple. Go buy Bill's books, which are essential reading: Freezing Order and Red Notice. Follow Bill on Twitter. Let him know that you heard him here at Bill Browder. Mr. Browder, can you talk real quick? Everybody wants to talk to him. We got him right now. Thank you so much, Bill, for joining me. I appreciate it.
Great to be here.
So, lots to talk about, obviously. Everybody wants to talk to you. Were you surprised by what happened over the weekend in Russia with Prigozhin?
I was totally surprised and shocked from the beginning till the end to today. The whole thing surprised me. It surprised me that that anyone would have the guts to organize an armed insurrection. That's the first thing. Second thing that surprised me was how these people, these Wagner mercenaries, were not in any way opposed, and they were welcomed. They were hugged. People taking selfies with them.
Yeah.
What surprised me then was that he got within a couple hundred miles of Moscow and just stopped. It surprised me that he cut a deal to not go further. And it surprised me that Putin, who's the most ruthless dictator around, didn't take him immediately to Red Square or put him in a guillotine and chop his head off. The whole thing just surprises me in every way.
So anybody who says they know what they're talking about, from the intel community to the business community, is probably wrong, because we really are also surprised.
Well, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. And, whenever something doesn't make sense on the surface, it just means you don't have all the information. And so as I start to unpack what happened, I mean, there's a lot of different things that explain pretty much every step of the way of what happened. Probably the most important thing is that, Putin has created this image for us that he's this strongman dictator, that he's in charge, that everybody's scared of him. Maybe they love him, but they're certainly scared of him, and he's totally in control. And turns out that we don't have that. That's not what happened. That's not what's going on in Russia. Right. He's not in total control. What seems to be happening in Russia is that, first of all, you can't trust any opinion polls. So if that you hear these opinion polls that say all this stuff, it's just not true.
Right.
And we also don't have a lot of information because nobody can speak their mind without going to jail. But what we see here is that, if you do a market test, you send in a bunch of people who are against Putin, they come out with flowers and selfie sticks. And that tells you pretty much everything you need to know about the popularity of this war and the hold that the Putin regime has over people, which is nothing like what we thought beforehand.
Vladimir Putin has now given, I think, 3 public speeches, short, brief speeches, all similar in tone, apparently, and in a rhetoric. First, after the mutiny or rebellion began, and he said, this is like 1917 again, which I know you question. I want to know why. And then after it was over, and then one more time yesterday, I think after Prigozhin spoke. So what are you noticing in what he is saying, and why is he going out in cameras and saying those things?
Well, he can't be sitting in his bunker saying nothing. So, I mean, this was the most significant, humiliating challenge to his power in 23 years since he took power. So he's kind of in a really bad place, because the only way that a person like Putin can stay in power and undemocratically is by scaring everybody who might have designs on his position. And all of a sudden, he doesn't look so scary. And so he's in a very bad place, and he's got to figure out what he's going to do about this very bad place. And so obviously he's going to come out and try to say a few things, but that doesn't solve his problem. His problem is now, he looks weak. And if he looks weak, there's a huge incentive for other people to try to come and take his job. His job is an extremely lucrative job. If you're in a dishonest kleptocracy like Russia and you get to his place, you can steal hundreds of billions of dollars for yourself. And so a lot of people want that position. They want that money, and they're ready to go for it. And they used to not go for it because they thought they would die trying to get it. But now all of a sudden it doesn't look so scary. And so he's got to really, over the next, days, weeks, months, he's got to reassert his authority. And how does he do that? He's got to become more sadistic, more vicious, more ruthless than anyone could have ever imagined. Now, he's got to overreact.
What does that look like? What do you think that overreaction looks like?
Well, I think that if you're a member of the Russian establishment, you're got to be pretty scared right now, because I think he's going to start arresting people. He's going to do what Stalin did in 1937. He's going to purge the country of people he thinks are disloyal.
But that's the big question, I think. That's my big question. I was going to wait to get to it and build up sound effects, but you just brought me there. How can Vladimir Putin know who to purge? He has to know he's been kept in the dark by the very men around the table with him. How does he figure out who to purge? What if he gives an order and it's not followed?
Well, he can purge anyone he feels like purging. It doesn't have to be correct. He just has to make, it's kind of like in those mafia movies where like the mafia boss is going around the room, talking about, the challenges that they face. And then he just decides to blow one of his capos away in front of everybody else. That's all, Putin has to show that he's in charge, and in charge in Russia means, death, torture and imprisonment. And so I think you could expect that kind of stuff to happen. And if somebody doesn't follow his orders, then that person's on the list. And he's got to then follow through and just start rounding these people up. And this is not like some long, shot prediction. This is what happens in these countries. This is what happened in Turkey when there was a coup attempt in Turkey. Erdogan, the leader of Turkey, just arrested everybody he could possibly think of. Anyone he didn't like, anyone he thought was disloyal, anyone he thought was sided with the other side, anyone who didn't react quickly enough. All sorts of army generals, judges, doctors, lawyers, teachers, everybody has been rounded up and stuck in jail. And Turkey is not nearly as dangerous and ruthless a country as Russia. Russia is a place where this is what they do. They've already been doing this to democracy activists and human rights activists and lawyers. Why wouldn't they start doing this to the people who were like, didn't side immediately with Putin as this thing was unfolding, and the people who were, hugging the Wagner soldiers and the anybody and everybody. He's got to make examples out of so many people that the whole country just goes into a sort of apoplexy of fear, so that he ends up restoring control, because that's the only way. And if he doesn't do that, or if he doesn't do it successfully, someone's going to say, this guy is weak. We can have a go. Blood in the water is all that matters. And this is the first time we've seen that. Maybe, I don't know, ever with Putin. Ever. As far as we've seen in other situations, we saw it, in Soviet history when, when Gorbachev, when they tried to do a coup on Gorbachev, and then a few months later, the Soviet Union fell apart. And we can't forget that there's also a war going on. There's a war between Russia and Ukraine. And that was what prompted this whole thing. It is this total failure of Russia to execute this war. And that's going to get worse for the Russians. And what caused this to happen, I always thought it was going to be the Russian mothers who came out and stopped this.
Mothers of dead soldiers being so horrified, so many of them, that would somehow put pressure on the leadership, Putin.
Correct. But the mothers are too scared to put their head above the parapet. But all of a sudden, it was this murderous, criminal, disgusting man, Prigozhin, who was on the battlefield watching as young men were being thrown into battle and killed needlessly. And so he was the one who that was the original inspiration for this action was he was so angry about how this war was being executed. And this war is going to continue to be executed by the Ukrainians using American and European weapons, and they're going to do a good job, and they're going to kill a lot more Russian soldiers and cause a lot more strife and a lot more infighting and a lot more second guessing. And it's not going to be any better for Putin going forward. And so he when he invaded Ukraine on February 24th last year, he opened up Pandoras Box, and now we're starting to see how it's affecting him. Yeah,
you said then, and so many others did too, about he was in a real position of strength until he did that.
Well, I think he did that in the hopes that it was going to be where they were going to roll into Kiev and people were going to hug the soldiers with selfie sticks and so on and so forth. That didn't happen in Kiev. They've killed 225,000 Russian soldiers. And,
I understand why they would think that would have been the result. I mean, but
it did happen in Rostov when a bunch of mercenaries rolled into Rostov. They were throwing flowers and hugging them and taking their pictures with them. So it happened in the wrong place, but that's what Putin was hoping for. And he thought if it had happened in Kiev, he'd be, solidly, secure without any threats to his power. Now he's got serious threats to his power. And I mean, there's a lot of misinformation about what all this means. But I can tell you with 100% certainty that he looks much weaker, and you can't be a strongman dictator and look weak. You just can't, not in Russia.
Bill, I think everybody can take joy in the downfall of Vladimir Putin, but then the very next moment, we have to wonder what comes next, and what with their nuclear weapon arsenal, that being the main concern. What is your main concern? Because obviously, Prigozhin is also a horrible, terrible, violent, corrupted man.
He's also a criminal and a crook.
Yeah, he also interfered in the American elections.
But he likes money. So, I mean, it could easily be that he publicly stated that there was no reason for this war before the war. I mean, before he went on this rampage. And, I mean, who knows what happens if Putin were to be replaced? The conventional wisdom is we don't want him to be replaced because this nuclear arsenal and, but how could we say that? The guy is threatening nuclear war all the time. They blew up this dam to cause the largest environmental disaster in the history of Europe. They're threatening to blow up the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Who in their right mind would say we should try to keep this guy Putin in place? I don't know what the next guy will do, and it's not our place to decide that. We shouldn't be into or orchestrating regime change. What we should do is be building up an iron curtain around this country so they can't do any more damage to anybody, and with the threat of unbelievable retaliation if they do. And they will respect that because they did for many decades during the Cold War. There's no reason to think that they wouldn't be as practical going forward. What Putin took advantage of is perceived weakness of the West, and he was not right. He was not wrong in that, and that we all tried to appease him.
What is he currently negotiating feverishly, and is he making concessions? I mean, it would seem, by the way, that Prigozhin demanded that these two guys that were the leaders of the military, the defense department, that they resign. Is there any confirmation that they've resigned? I thought I saw at least one of them at a table with Putin yesterday.
They haven't resigned, and Putin can't possibly follow through on that request, because if it does, it makes him look even weaker, and it puts him even further at risk. And so Putin is in a terrible place right now, and everyone's saying, well, are they going to, how long does Prigozhin have to live? I mean, yes, Putin likes to go after his enemies, but I would say that as much as Prigozhin should be scared of Putin, Putin should be scared of Prigozhin. Prigozhin is a cold-blooded, sadistic killer. He's publishing images of him using a sledgehammer to like crush and kill somebody's skull. It's like ISIS videos. I mean, this guy is just as ruthless and as murderous as you can possibly get, and has huge resources. He's got a huge mercenary force. 17 different African countries have Wagner mercenaries, plus all these guys that marched with him towards Moscow. This is a guy that is extremely dangerous, armed and dangerous, and Putin should be scared of him as well.
I saw this interview that you did, I think, with a CNBC anchor, and she's like, Bill, are there any winners here? It doesn't seem like anybody's winning. And you were like, yes, Ukraine. And I thought it was a weird question. So what does this mean, most importantly, for Ukraine, for Zelensky, for the war?
Well, first of all, the only fighting force that the Ukrainians really had trouble with was Wagner. That was the only ones that they respected, because Wagner, under Prigozhin, actually knew what he was doing. He's gone. And the Wagner fighting force is gone, and whatever numbers get subsumed into the Russian army are just going to be led by idiots and incompetents. And so all of a sudden, one of the major adversaries is gone. The second thing, and I just saw reference of this in the last hour, is that the president's security advisor, his name is Zolotov, has requested upgrading all the equipment so they can defend themselves if somebody else tries to march towards Rostov or wherever. So all of a sudden, they now have to dilute the equipment that's available on the Ukrainian front for the sort of hardening up of defenses around the rest of Russia. So that's excellent for Ukraine.
One of the most violent days of the war was the other day on Saturday, certainly for the Air Force, when Russians were killing Russians. And that creates a real issue to execute the war, is what you're saying.
Indeed. But moving on, the Russians now have to firm up their defenses inside all these places. And they have a shortage of equipment to start out with. So they're going to use some of that equipment and some of those military resources to firm up various places like Rostov, where they saw everybody just going undefended. And then most importantly, every gain that Ukraine makes, every Russian soldier that they kill, every bit of equipment that they destroy, leads to more anger, infighting, second guessing within the Russian ranks, which is what caused this thing in the first place. Yeah. And you put it all together, and I think Ukraine is a big winner out of this whole thing. And Putin is the big loser out of this whole thing, whether or not Prigozhin achieved his goals or not. I mean, as much as I dislike Prigozhin and think he's a monstrous man and a total criminal, we've had 23 years of Putin. It'd be just good to see him go as soon as possible.
Do you think there's any way Ukraine ever gets Crimea back?
I think there's every way they get Crimea back. It all depends on how much support we give them and whether we give them enough equipment to take it back. But the Russians are much worse than anyone expects, and the Ukrainians are much better than anyone expects. Now, of course, Putin has a lot of resources. He can go draft up another 1 million men and throw them into battle where they all die, and then he could draft another 1 million men, and that does cause trouble. And what Putin is hoping for and praying for is to hold out until November 2024. And then hope that Trump gets elected in America, because Trump basically has indicated that he would stop supporting Ukraine. That's Putin's real sort of Hail Mary.
I think it's really important who was in the White House when this happened this weekend. It probably would not have happened had the American people not elected Joe Biden.
Well, I'm not sure whether the Americans played any role this weekend, but what I can say is that the Americans played a crucial role supporting Ukraine over the last year and a half. And they need to continue to support Ukraine, whoever's president, because it's in our absolute vital security interests that Ukraine fights off and succeeds in this war, so that we don't have to ourselves, because that's the obvious next step, is that we'll be at war with Russia if Ukraine folds or loses.
Given the events of this weekend, what would you say to the naysayers, those who had not supported the U.S. and the West, NATO's role in supporting Ukraine in the war, saying things like it will only perpetuate more suffering and eventually Russia will win anyway?
Well, we see that Russia is not eventually going to win, that Russia is a Potemkin village. You know, this fake, you put up the fake these grand looking buildings with just a facade. Behind the facade, it's totally empty, hollowed out by lies and corruption in the same way as everything else in Russia has been.
Bill, anything else? I didn't ask anything else that you haven't told anybody. Any other thoughts about what's happening? How closely you must be paying attention to it all?
Well, I think everybody is paying attention to it right now. I mean, it's the most interesting and consequential thing that's gone on. It's like, last Saturday, I was at the tennis finals at Queen's in London, which is a very popular tennis match pre Wimbledon, and
were you playing? Were you competing, or were you watching?
No. I was watching. I was a spectator. I was a spectator.
Our next match is between Bill Browder. What the hell?
I was a spectator, and I was sitting there thinking, God, why do these guys have to do their coup on the day of the tennis? Yeah. Because I was trying to watch the tennis, but I had to watch every. I was on my Twitter every 5 seconds trying to figure out who got where or when. It was like, well, and I said to people, this is like, the moment that the Berlin Wall started coming down. I wish it had come down, but in any event, very consequential, very important moment, and we'll see what happens next.
Yeah, and we'll be watching your Twitter feed and everything else that you're saying about this as you analyze this. Bill, thanks so much for joining me. As always, really appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, there he goes, Bill Browder. Amazing. Such a great guy and conversation to have and great guests. And I cannot do it without your support. Get these amazing guests each and every day, all day. So please let Bill know that you heard him on the show. You can go tweet at him. He'll probably see it. He's very active on Twitter at Bill Browder, BillBrowder.com. Get his books. Also, to see video of my conversation with Bill Browder, follow me on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. You can get to all those through the show notes as well, or standupwithpete.com. As always, thank you for your support. Rate and review the show on Spotify, on Apple, on YouTube, and subscribe at patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Peace and love, folks.